Hello and welcome to my first video on this new channel, Jonny's Book Review. So I only really started this channel and wanted to post this video because of one book that I've been recently reading. Been reading this book for the past 3 months. As the title says, you can probably guess what it is. It is 1984 by George Orwell. So I'm a fairly new reader. I decided to pick this book up because I had seen so many top 10 lists saying it was one of the best books out there. It was a classic. It changed the genre. Stuff like that, dumb stuff. Anyway, word of mouth as well. So many people came up to me and said that I needed to read this. And just it had such a high rating as well. So I did some research on Goodreads. Over 4 million people have reviewed it and rated it. And out of 5 stars, the average that was given was 4.2 stars. So this is a heavily rated book, so you can imagine it must be pretty good. So many people have read it and really enjoyed it. So I was like, how can it go wrong? How can it be a bad book? So to start the review, this book genuinely made me lose faith in society. And this isn't for the reasons that, if you've read the book, you may understand. This isn't for the reasons that the author wanted you to feel about society and the way that he portrays it to lose faith. No, I lost faith in society when I saw how high the reviews were, and then I read the book for myself. It's terrible. If I had a 3-word review, it's complete trash. It's so bad. It's absolute crap what is in this book. It's a waste of time, and I don't understand how anyone could rate it more than 1 star. It's not good. It's just not good. Let's break this down. Okay, so firstly, I just want to talk about the characters. In books, you got the story and you got the characters who take part in that story. So they're pretty important, right? You need them to be good characters. So the main character of the book is called Winston. He's a dull fellow, I'll tell you that. He is not entertaining whatsoever, got nothing about him. And I understand what the author's trying to do. George Orwell's trying to paint a picture of a dull dystopian future where everyone's dull. But just give him something to be interesting. I couldn't read about him. It was just so boring reading about his life. I get it. I'm not an idiot. I get that's kind of what the author was trying to do, but it just made for a boring read, and I did not enjoy it. So he's just a boring, flip-flopping character, which confuses you with his emotions and his decision-making as well. Finally, probably the second main character of the book, his love interest, Julia, gets introduced, but that's midway through the book. Okay, so the only real interesting thing that happens is when Julia and him start interacting and they start to get together. And that's halfway through the book, okay? So the first half of the book is just complete world building. And I get it. An author has to do world building. It's important, especially for a book like this, where it's all about the world that the character's set in. There was just too much, okay? About 150 pages just of slobber about who the party is and what they want and how they make people act. And I get it, but it could have been put into 2 chapters at most. We could have talked about, newspeak, doublethink, all of these things that the author talks about throughout this 50% of the book without any story development. It's just a waste of time. I read half the book and basically learned nothing about the story, nothing about Winston's character. There's barely any character development. It's just not a good start of the book. It's just too much world building and just not enough development. When you pick up a book, you want to read a good story with good, well-driven characters. None of that. Just none of it. Just talking about what's in the world, who the people are, and doesn't actually give you too much information about what's going on in general. Anyway, when the story actually starts going midway through the book again, Julia gets introduced. She's also just a terrible character. I mean, it's hard to write a character more dull than Winston. George Orwell did it. Julia's so boring to to hear their interactions, it's just terrible. But I was intrigued and happy that she became part of this story because it actually meant something was happening. We're just seeing this guy live his daily life, and yeah, he's going against the party and against the society and everything like that, but nothing's going on. So finally, stuff starts to happen when Julia gets introduced. So I was at least happy. I was like, maybe this is finally the book that people were talking about. Maybe this is where it finally picks up and it will be worth the read, okay? But no. Worst part of the book is still to come. So they're basically together. Not much is happening. They're going against a party. And Winston gets given a book, which is about something that's called the Brotherhood. Now, the Brotherhood are people who are against the party, against the society, however you want to say it. They're just against the world. And Winston's intrigued by this. He gets given a book. We spend so much of the book of 1984 reading another book. 74 pages of this book is us reading about Winston reading another book. And it's so boring. Who wants to read this? Who wants to go through this? The boredom was, I could feel it flowing through my bloodstream. It was that intense. I couldn't sit and read that. I had to do it in multiple sittings. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning of this review that I read this book in 3 months. It usually takes me 1 month to read a book. Even though I'm a fairly new reader, it doesn't take me this long. It was just such a boring read that I couldn't get through it all. Anyway, where is that to? Yeah, so 74 pages of a 357-page book is about the main character reading another book. And you would think that this would be such a significant moment of the story, but it really isn't. It's really not. The book doesn't talk to us much about what's going on. It tells us stuff that we already know about the party and a little bit extra about the world, like what's going on with wars and stuff like that. It gives us a little extra, but again, it's just world building, which we spent half the book already doing. It was just an unneeded addition in the book and just completely just broke up the story. Stuff was actually starting to happen. It was interesting. And then he starts reading this long book and it's so drawn out and rubbish. Anyway, book ends. Thank God that happened. And then basically him and Julia get captured by the party. And I'm like, okay, this is actually interesting. Something's finally happening. Thank goodness. So stuff starts to happen. They get captured. And then you don't have that much left of the book. Half of it's been world building and Winston's boring life. A little bit's been about him and Julia. And then the rest of it's been him reading another book. So the remainder of the book is about 80 pages somewhat. And that's just him being tortured. Just flat out painfully tortured, mentally, physically. I mean, it's interesting and all, but again, it's no story. The whole story is so condensed in such a long book. It's crazy. Not much happens in such a long book. It's just an awful read. He gets tortured, he gives up everything he's been doing with Julia, all that. Expected. It's such a predictable book. I was begging there to be a twist just to relieve me of my boredom, but nothing was seemingly happening. The only 2 twists were really O'Brien, which was kind of foreseeable, right? It's not hard to see that. I maybe thought Julia was also a spy, and I was like, that could be cool. No, she's just a random girl. Yeah, so not much happens. They get captured by the spies, tortured. It talks about Winston's story of how basically the party's trying to make him normal in their eyes, which is thinking like they do. And it works. The ending of the book comes and Winston gets released after traumatic event after traumatic event. He's released and he loves Big Brother. Little weird how it phrased it like he loves it. I get what the author's trying to do. I get it. I just wasn't going with it because I want a good story, right? That's why I pick up a book. I don't pick up a book to read about a possible dystopian future and nothing happens in it. I want there to be a story there. Like, what's the point of world building if there's no character building or anything like that? It just seems redundant. Okay, so the next part I want to get onto is how people speak about this book like it's some historical classic. Like it's some revolutionary tale that changes the way of storytelling and the world we live in. It's just not, okay? I know exactly what's happened. People have read this book and they're like, wow, that was really boring. but I just wasted 8 hours reading that. So they add meaning to such a meaningless novel. So they just want to add meaning for the sake of knowing that they didn't waste their time. So they actually, it's basically what it says in the book. They program their brain to think it's a good book when it's really not. Anyone who picks this book up and reviews it directly after reading it knows it's not a good book. But we overthink it and we analyze. We're like, wow, that actually had a lot of value in it. No, it didn't. It really didn't. And everyone says it's some warning for the future of what the future could be like and looking at the government and stuff like that and where things are going. You know, I want to get political. That could be it. You know, the future maybe is that. Nobody wants that to be the future, though. Don't look at it as some kind of warning and like, oh, what's George Orwell trying to tell us? No, he just one day thought up, oh, this would be a terrible future where society is controlled by one party and it controls the way we think and people are disappearing and dying. You know, he just thought of it one day. It's not some elaborate warning to all of us, okay? I'm going to say it. I don't care. Yeah, you're just trying to add meaning to something meaningless and pointless, basically. So the truth is, people who read it waste their time. I wasted 8 hours of my life. 3 months, actually. I came back and forth to this book, just desperately trying to finish it, hoping something would happen, and nothing ever did. Let's break down a review that I found of this book. This is a review on Goodreads by someone called Lynn, who has actually chosen to read this book more than once. They actually reread it every year, they said in this. Why? Are you trying to, relive Winston's torture by reading it? It's not a good book. I don't know why you'd want to reread it so many times. There's only a few good concepts in it, a few good points to take away. I just don't get it. I think it's a load of crap, and I don't understand why anyone would want to reread this book. Anyway, let's read this out. So in 2018, this was one of their rereads. They said, "It is a testament to great literature that a reader recalls a work years later, and this is a book about which I frequently think. The scene that I most often think is when Winston and Julie are captured." So again, people calling the book historic and special. It's not. You're just adding meaning to it when there isn't actually meaning to it. It's a pointless novel, and I wouldn't hear anything different. In 2019, this was another reread. Lost in my memory was to what extent Orwell describes and explains his nightmare. Winston Smith cautiously, and that is not a word, surreptitiously, never heard of that, discovers the brotherhood led by Goldstein and then learns all too well about O'Brien's duplicitous doublethink. Interesting. More than just a cautionary political tale, Orwell has described an ideological abyss into which we must not gaze, a glimpse that authoritarian power plays to. This is exactly what I'm talking about. People adding really just any kind of meaning to the book to make it seem like it's got value. Ideological abyss. What does that mean? In terms of this book, ideological abyss into which we must not gaze. But you reread the book every year, so you're gazing into that ideological abyss every year. I just don't understand it. I don't understand what these readers who think it's a great book actually think in their mind. Have they just genuinely broken it down to try and bring some value out of that reading time? I don't get it personally. Like I said, I'm a fairly new reader. Maybe it's all gone over my head. Maybe I'm just stupid, but this is my genuine reaction to what I've just read, and I didn't enjoy it. Yeah, this is a perfect example of adding meaning to a pointless novel. And I also thought, people who are reading this out of a mindset of mistrust towards the government and towards society, they see this as a little inkling of hope that they're correct in what they're thinking. And, like I said, I'm not going to get political, but it's just people adding meaning, right? That's all it is. If you read the novel from face value, it's not good, it's not interesting, it's not entertaining. And that's how I looked at it. I didn't look at it as some thing that's trying to tell me to look at it in the real world or look at the government or look at society differently. If a book has that impact on me, it has that impact on me. This one just didn't. I didn't find it interesting or engrossing in any way. Yeah, let's close this then. So some of the stuff I saw describing those top 10 lists of this book are just not true. I would go in with caution reading this. If you want to read it because it's so high rated, go ahead, but it's not an interesting story if that's what you're looking for. If you just want to read it for a timepiece, go ahead. I am reviewing it with a 2 out of 10, and yeah, it's just not a good read.